Hi everyone. I'm going to break from my normal video format to talk about what I think is an extremely important trial. It's important for a number of reasons. On February 1st, Jian Ghomeshi, a former Canadian public personality, he was on a CBC show called Q and was fairly popular. On February 1st, Jian had his first day in court. Now, this was his first day in a real court, but he was put on trial in the court of public opinion back on October 26, 2014. There's a couple of factors from this, the way this whole story broke, that I think are important to be aware of. First of all, anonymous accusers had spent some time with reporters who then made these accusations in the Toronto Star and purely through media, gave a number of media interviews afterwards, and it was some time before any of them actually pressed charges or went to the police. In a way, this is Jian Ghomeshi's second trial, but it's the only one in which he was able to offer a defense. Of course, in the court of public opinion, it's very rare that the accused is given proper trial where you have two sides to the argument. And that is turning out to be quite important now that the real trial has begun. First of all, the reason why the public was fairly unanimous in convicting Jian was because a large number of women came forward and made similar allegations. The public generally believes when this happens that it means that the person is guilty, because how could there be so many accusations? And there actually is a way that this can happen, and hopefully I'll make that clear to you. So, meet Lucy DeCoutere. She stepped up and said that she would be to assault survivors what David Beckham was to Armani underwear. She decided to be the hero and defend all battered and sexually assaulted women everywhere. And she has been so intricately woven into this story that she deserves a whole video on her own. It has come out in the trial that despite her claims, Lucy was actively pursuing a relationship with Jian, and it was to no effect, and their relationship turned sour, and suddenly she's the leader of his accusers. So how is this of importance to the way we end up with a number of women making similar allegations and why everyone believes them? Let's look at an article published in Toronto Life written by a supposed friend of Jian Ghomeshi's. She had known him for 10 years and she calls herself a friend of his, and I think that's highly debatable. She wrote an article called The Cult of Jian, His Life as an Outcast, Who's Standing By Him, and Why He's Sure He'll Walk. Now, before I go through all of the ways in which Lee basically makes sure that everyone will find him guilty and all of his friends will abandon their friendship, I'm going to focus on a part that happens a little bit later in the article. Soon, the volume of accusations crushed any lingering doubt. Why would so many unconnected women fabricate such similar stories for no conceivable benefit to themselves? And then Lee goes on to answer her own question. The actor, Lucy DeCoutere, who was the highest profile of Jian's alleged victims to come forward, became the point person for others who wanted to tell their story but couldn't bring themselves to do it publicly. The way she described it to me, she coordinated a covert network of women who have spent the last 7 months sharing their assault stories with each other. Now wind that back a few sentences and let's look at this really closely. She is describing to a journalist how she coordinated a covert network of women and that they'd spent the last 7 months, that is, the entire time since the story broke, they've spent that entire time sharing their assault stories with each other. Now, when you think about it, considering all of the allegations were made in the media, that anyone coming forward was told what it was that they're supposed to be remembering before they go to the police, and then once they've connected with Lucy and her little network, they can solidify their stories and coordinate it. So if you're wondering how everybody is giving very similar accounts of how they were treated by Jian Ghomeshi, it's actually not that hard to figure out. So the fascinating thing going on in this article, which I encourage you to read, is Lee's rewriting of history. She goes back through the 10 years she's known Jian, and she describes her vision of what all of these things meant. Every time he made a joke, it was now lewd. Every time he acted a little bit weird, it was creepy. And she even says, I'd learned later that even Jian's apparent lack of a filter was carefully calibrated for maximum effect. Long before he was a household name in Canada, he was a master of calculating what other people wanted and presenting them with it, so long as it didn't conflict with his own ever-pressing desires. It's a bit of an odd statement, and you'll actually find a lot of conflicting accounts. She describes somebody who's extremely anxious and somebody who's really insecure, and then she presents him as a mastermind. So how did she come to this conclusion? So Jian's friend now believes that he was using an ingenious disguise that he used to hide in plain sight. He was a wolf in organic fair trade lamb's clothing. Here we go. One woman I spoke to for this story, who is now accusing Jian of sexual assault, believes his persona was a deliberate cover for his predatory behavior. She thinks he created and used his personal brand, one that was endorsed by the same network that brought us David Suzuki and the Friendly Giant, to get in touch with women so he could abuse them. She also believes that for him, in his sickness, that dark irony was a turn-on. So, after knowing him for 10 years, everything is different because a woman she spoke to has planted this idea that everything was a setup, that this was all planned and calculated. And that's why when you read her account of her revisitation on the 10-year friendship, you will see her rewriting history in a way that doesn't actually mesh. So all the way back on October 30th of 2014, so this is like a day before the police actually announced that they were opening a case file on him and doing an investigation, we have somebody named Melissa Martin writing for Nothing in Winnipeg. That's gone now. This is why the screenshots from Wayback Machine. She says, do you know about Jian? For at least half as long as I have been alive, a string of 5 short words, or something very like them, slipped through the back channels of certain social scenes. The question was whispered around wine glasses from Toronto to Vancouver. They were tapped out in texts and Twitter direct messages, between old friends or between kindred spirits newly met. In time, the answer that most followed became just as familiar as the question that preceded. A nodded affirmative, a mouth twisted in a rictus of disgust. Do you know about Jian? So, this is only a few days after the initial Toronto Star article, and this is before there was a police investigation. We've already got people, and this was mentioned by others that I've seen, still active in the public opinion of the guilt or innocence of Mr. Ghomeshi, telling everybody, you all know it's true. And now I'm going to show you something really scary about Leah McLaren, and actually about the way women operate. She tells in this article the story of Jian going to a friend Jeffrey Latimer's cabin, and that as the more stories were coming out about him, Latimer asked him to leave. She presents this as the proper way friends should treat Jian. And then she moves on to one of the people who has stood by Jian's side since the beginning, Sarah Bobus. She says, Sarah Bobus is a delicately pretty woman in her 30s who has worked at various PR agencies around the city. She is currently employed by a company called Jones Media in the position of Content and Product Science Director. And then goes on to talk about her Twitter bio. This is outrageous. For the people who are actually choosing not to abandon ship like Lee, her judgment upon them is that she will tell the world your name, where you work, and, potentially somebody might try to get you fired, but that wouldn't be her fault. She then goes on to accuse Bobus of contacting all of the accusers, trying to infiltrate their group, and mentions that Bobus vehemently denies that this happened and they had a tense email exchange. And Bobus tries to explain how to be an actual good friend to somebody, but The bizarre thing here is that McLaren fails to realize that the contact of these women, she recognizes that that's a problem. But she doesn't realize that this covert network set up by one of the accusers is a much bigger problem. In fact, it can destroy the charges against him because it's proof of collusion. Now, the key factor in proving Ghomeshi's not guilty of the crimes he's accused of has been the series of emails, which, to the dismay of his accusers, he has kept these emails for at least 13 years. Lee offers an email, and I think this is just fabulously cruel. She presents an email which apparently is proof of his dastardly ways, and it says, "My dearest Lee," this is after the death of his father, "thank you for this kind note. It's lovely to hear from you. I won't pretend to be okay. I'm gutted. Still trying to figure out how to even process the loss of my dad, but words from old friends do help. Entre nous, I think I told you once, many years ago, that I had a long-time crush on you. I think I probably imagined marrying you. Well, you lucked out that never happened. I'm an anxiety-disordered burden, but the upshot would have been getting to know my dad. He really was the best, and he really could light up a room. You two would have loved each other." And Lee is presenting this as evidence that Jian Ghomeshi is a sick and twisted bastard who, at the point of his father's death, apparently was obsessed with sex. Just think about it. Go back, watch that, read that again, and tell me if you think that that is a sick and twisted bastard or just somebody who's trying to say something nice to an old-time friend in a point of grief over his father's death. I think actually that's a pretty normal email. And that, my friends, is how people go back and rewrite history to turn somebody you're told is a monster into a monster based on nothing.